Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. My name is Darius Way. I'm one of the co-organisers of ProductTank Perth. First, a warm welcome to all of you joining us for our first meetup of 2020. Earlier this year, we were honoured to have Marty Cagan reach out to us and offer up his time to meet the Perth community in person and talk all things product. Yet, I don't think anyone could have predicted what we're all going through at the moment. I've been personally moved by stories locally and abroad on how COVID-19 has impacted the lives of family, friends, colleagues and acquaintances, and undoubtedly these are challenging times for all of us. Despite that, the strength of this community has brought us all together. It's great to see so many of you guys join this particular live stream. And of course, the generosity of Marty to still offer up his time, albeit in a virtual setting, is greatly appreciated. Now, Marty Cagan is probably somebody that needs no introduction, but for those of you new to product, he founded the Silicon Valley Product Group, also known as SVPG, to pursue his interest in helping others create successful products through his writing, his speaking, advising, and coaching. He's also served as an executive responsible for defining and building products for some well-known companies, including Hewlett-Packard, Netscape, and eBay. And notably, and this is definitely one of my favorite books, he's the author of Inspired, which is a staple on bookshelves within most product organizations. So suffice to say, he's achieved a lot as a product leader, and I'm sure there's much that we can learn from his many years of experience. So just some housekeeping before we get started. Some of you have shared questions on Pigeonhole prior to the event, and thanks very much for sharing that. That'll allow us to get straight into the AMA. You're also welcome to post questions on YouTube, and I'll help facilitate the asking of these questions as the afternoon progresses. Normally, I'd point out where the toilets are, but you're all in your own home, so you know where they are. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Marty to the virtual stage.
Hi there.
Hey, Marty, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thanks so much for offering up your time. I know you're back home in San Francisco. And look, we really appreciate you offering this time. I know it's getting a bit late over there, but yeah, we really appreciate it. So yeah, did you have anything to share? If not, we can go straight into the questions.
No, I am sorry I couldn't be there in person. I was looking forward to. I was actually in Australia, and when everything changed, and I was in Sydney and had to stop the trip and catch an early flight home. But otherwise, I would have. Was looking forward to spending time there in Perth.
Yeah, it's a shame we couldn't make it work this time around, but hopefully next time we'll get you out here and we can have you meet the community in person.
Looking forward to it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've got a fair few questions here, so I'm going to get straight into it, and we'll hopefully get through a good chunk of these as the afternoon progresses. So the first question is, how do you balance short-term versus long-term thinking?
Well, so there's really two parts to that answer, in the sense that the product leader versus the product teams. The product leader is ultimately responsible for that balance. Normally, it's not that hard. We have a product vision that is our long-term. Product vision is anywhere from 2 to 3 years out if it's a pure software company, to 5 to 10 years out if it's more complicated or a device company. So the vision is our long-term, and of course, everything we do, we want to go in the direction of the vision. But we also have shorter-term objectives too. Normally, they're done quarterly. Of course, old-style companies would use roadmaps for the short-term stuff, but I advocate using objectives, team objectives and they're quarterly objectives. And so the quarterly objectives are really how we execute on our product strategy, and our product strategy's job is to make that vision happen. So it's not that hard normally to balance. You've got a vision on the long term, you've got a strategy that gets you there, and the strategy turns into objectives for each product team for each quarter.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense, and definitely something that we practice internally at my company, and it's definitely worked out pretty well for us. So next question. Any tips for product leaders managing a crisis like COVID-19, where everything you may know about the business and customer get turned upside down?
Well, there's sort of two things to talk about there. One is how we as teams need to adjust during sort of the time of COVID-19. And then there's the question of how our market changes, how our customers change. I'm a little, I mean, we are in unprecedented times. There's no question. I'm not trying to equate it, but there have been many recessions, for example. I've lived through several of them. And so I think it's too early to project how our customers and our markets will change. It's not hard to predict that the economy is going to take a hit. The only question is how big and long a hit. But I think it's dangerous to extrapolate from today the future. And I think there's a lot of people that are making some rash decisions right now. And I'm not entirely sure they're wrong. It's way too soon to say they're right. And I just think as a society, we adapt, we change. There are things that are changing, but if you're solving if you were solving real problems for your customers last year, you will probably be solving those same problems for them next year and several years from now. So I don't think you want to overreact as far as your markets. There are certain companies obviously really impacted in a bad way. Other ones have been fortunate in the sense, like look at Zoom or Peloton. These companies are obviously right time, right place. So they're taking advantage of these shifts. But you know, at some point Peloton will go back to more normal rates of growth. Same with Zoom. So I don't want to I'd be careful not to extrapolate from today. We're in a really major time of flux right now.
Yeah, no, that's definitely good advice that I think we can all heed. So next question, any input and thoughts around product development / product management in less commercial environments such as not-for-profits?
Well, so product development versus product management. Normally the product development, it would be the engineering side, and product management as far as how is that different in nonprofits. Fundamentally, it shouldn't be different. I dealt with some amazing nonprofits. One of them is actually the BBC, which obviously I know Australia is not England, but you're all familiar with the BBC. And when I first met them, they told me, you know, they're definitely not interested. They're not trying to make money. They are trying to create the most good as they can. And there's some very, very great product teams at the BBC and some great product people that have come out of the BBC. So there's no fundamental reason why it shouldn't. In practice, in my experience, a lot of the nonprofits suffer from they have a really hard time attracting the same caliber staff in general that a for-profit does. And so I found myself when I've tried to advise some nonprofits, when you're dealing with teams that don't have that same caliber engineers, same caliber designers, in fact, a lot of them don't even have any designers, and they rarely have a real tech product manager. It's really like playing poker with a very weak hand. And so that's a different issue. That's not, it really could happen. We've seen that in for-profits as well. Occasionally you'll find companies with just very weak people. But that, I think, is the bigger challenge. The fact that they're a nonprofit is not an issue at all.
Yeah, no, that's very good insight, and probably a good segue to this next question. This person has asked, we assume the CEOs we work for want unlimited growth and revenue. What's the hardest thing we have to do to get them what they want?
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't frame it that way. But yeah, the point is, the leaders of the company and the investors in the company, the employees in the company, all they have a vision they're there to achieve. They usually requires growth and profitability at some point. So how do we really make that happen? Of course, there's a lot of things that have to be done well for a company to succeed. In fact, any one of the critical things that don't happen could destroy those hopes. But if the question was really what's the most important thing, I would argue the answer is the product strategy. The product strategy is really like, how are we going to make that vision a reality? And that is often the difference. It's not hard to actually have an inspiring vision. Pretty much every startup I meet has one. The harder question is, can they actually make it happen? Can they execute on that vision? And that's really product strategy. I've been, well, as an advisor to companies, that's mostly what I work with, is on their strategy with them. But that's actually been that's normal and not that hard to do on a one-on-one basis when you sit down with whiteboards and the company dashboards, looking at all the analytics, looking at all the insights, looking at the capabilities of the team. You can come up with a good product strategy. What's been harder, and I've only recently feel like I've been able to tackle that in any meaningful way, is to kind of write about that topic in general. I've been working actually on another book that's sort of, well into the process right now. It'll be out next year, but that book, I wanted to tackle product strategy. And if anybody's interested in, well, how do you really come up with a good product strategy? If you just Google SVPG product strategy, it'll probably take you right there.
Yeah, that's no. Thanks for that, Marty. It's probably a good lead into the next question, and this one's actually a question I can personally relate to as both a founder and a CPO, and it's who should ultimately own the product vision and the strategy? Should it be the CEO, the CPO, or the founder?
Well, okay, yeah. So I'll give you two answers to that. The person who is ultimately responsible to make sure it's a good one is the head of product. So if there's a CPO, in a lot of startups, there is no CPO. It's one of the founders. It's often the CEO. But that said, in a lot of companies, and good, I coach heads of product on this, it's not going to happen unless the CEO of the company feels like it's his or her vision. So there's some nuance there. You have to help the leaders own that vision. They have to feel like it's theirs. It's not just yours. Otherwise, it's very unlikely you'll get the resources and the air cover you need to make that vision a reality. So, but ultimately, that's a responsibility of the head of product. It just takes some nuance to make sure that the other leaders in the company feel real ownership of that vision as well.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And the next question is naturally an extension of that. How do you explain product to non-product people?
Well, that can be hard if they are, depending on how far away from the tech industry they are. The first thing I would say is product is very different if you're doing traditional products, like they're known as consumer packaged goods, CPG, like a new Australian beer. That would be a CPG product. The way they do product is very different than the way we do it in the technology industry. The way I explain it to sort of a tech community is product is about combining real needs, real pain from customers with something that's just now possible. So we're really marrying the technology, the enabling technology with the need. And that's really what we're about.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to ask one of the questions on YouTube, and it kind of revolves around engagement. So this question is from Felix Kiefer. Thanks for your question, Felix. How have you engaged users in the past if the audience is rather hard to get excited and is not used to being engaged with generally, not used to be engaged with generally, as well as time poor in only a small group?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding that question. it's asking, how do you engage with users or customers if it's a small group that's kind of hard to reach? Is that what that was? You did sort of fade out a little bit in that question. Did I get the heart of it or miss something?
I'm sorry, I'm just rereading it right now. So if the audience is rather hard to get excited, or they're just generally not used to not used to being engaged with. So basically, if I'm understanding this correctly, if the audience is just generally quite a disengaged audience, how do you get them engaged? When you present.
So we're talking about not so much presenting, right? We're talking about, you've got a product. The problem is your customers are not very excited about your product. Is that right?
Yes. That's my take on this question.
Okay, well, let's pretend that's the question, because that is an excellent question. Because most products, that's the situation. The product might work. When I say work, what does that really mean? Probably usable reasonably, even if it's not great. And it probably doesn't crash. So it probably runs. But that doesn't mean anybody is interested in using it or buying it. And that, in fact, I would argue is the vast majority of products. And those, by the way, are the ones that fail. And so when we talk about the success rate of startups or even new products from existing companies, the batting average is terrible. The success rate is terrible. And it's because most products are that way. People are not excited about them. Now, what that really points to is that there are always 4 big risks in product. The first one, and I say it first because it's this one, it's the most important one, is the product valuable enough? In other words, will they buy it or choose to use it? So they can't be uninterested and choose to buy it. That won't happen. Second is, how usable is it? The third is, how feasible is it to build? And the fourth is it viable for our business? Can it support a business? Can we afford to market it? Can we afford to fund it? Can it support us in terms of monetization? So those are the 4 risks always in tech product. And the question was really, if I rephrase it, is what do you do when you don't have enough value? And that's what product teams need to be spending most of their time on. And that's because value is the hardest. Occasionally you get a product like Slack, which is considered by people so valuable that they'll all switch from whatever they just bought. Or right now, people switching to Zoom because they realized they really needed good video conferencing, and that one is so much better in terms of value and than so many of the other ones. And so when people switch to the iPhone, it's not like there wasn't a million phones before. It's just that this one was so much better, people switch. So that's what product is all about, coming up with enough value that people will choose to buy you or switch to you or use you.
Yeah, thanks for that response, Marty. Felix has clarified that was the nature of the question, so you hit the nail on the head.
All right, good.
And just you mentioned viability before, and there's a question here where users expect significantly more than the MVP. Often they are left disappointed. How do we manage user expectations from your view?
Well, the implication there, well, let me be more blunt. That's exactly why people get frustrated with the concept of MVP. They're using it completely wrong. That when people do these MVPs that are just half-baked, half-assed products, and then they don't understand, people don't like it. Well, what's the point of that? That is not what MVPs are for. MVPs are there to help us test those risks: value, usability, feasibility, viability. So if you do an MVP that's just half-baked and people don't get excited about it, what are you proving to anybody? So all you're really proving is that's not good. So the biggest thing that people do wrong, this actually is a long discussion, because this is all begs the question, well, how do you really create MVPs? But the main place people go wrong is if that, whoever asked that question, if I was sitting here with that person, I'd say, how long did it take you to build that MVP? And probably the answer would be measured in months, like 2, 3, 4 months. And I know what they really did is they built half a product. And of course, what they're, this is, I would argue, please read the book Inspired. It talks about all the techniques that you use. It's mostly about prototypes. There's 4 kinds of prototypes that every product team needs to use and be good at. And we have these kinds of prototypes because we have very different kinds of risks and different kinds of products, and we have quantitative and qualitative techniques. And so if you have an MVP and the response is bad, that says don't build it. That's what it says. You don't have a good enough solution yet. So really, though, that question shows a pretty big misunderstanding of the whole lean startup idea and how product discovery actually works.
Yeah, thanks for that, Marty. That's definitely insightful. The next few questions, I'm going to sort of focus on product development methodologies and road mapping and release plans. So one person has asked here, organizations crave product roadmap and release plan. Do you support this?
I understand it, but I don't advocate it. No, that's, what's being described, I've just come to call them feature teams. This is what most product organizations are doing. They, they're given a roadmap of features and projects, and the product team, I'm using that term loosely here, it's really a feature team. What do? So they've got some feature at the top of the roadmap or the next thing to do. And so they get going and they do a little bit of design. They might do a little bit of usability testing, and then it goes on the backlog, and then the engineers build it, and then they ship it. And they are a feature factory. That's what they do. Notice there really isn't a role for product there. They almost always have a product manager of some type, but it's really not a product manager. It's a project manager and a backlog administrator. That's what's going on. That is, that's the biggest thing I can say is that is not how good product companies work. In a real product team, an empowered product team, they're not given that roadmap. They're given problems to solve. Hard problems to solve, admittedly, but problems to solve. Like rather than a feature, which is like add video to our online help or whatever, instead of something like that on a roadmap, they're given a problem like, look, customer retention is not good. We are losing customers every year because or we might say, well, the onboarding process is too painful. These are hard problems. And so the product team is asked to go figure that out. They might try video, and if it doesn't work, if it does work, great. But if it doesn't work, they try the next thing and the next thing, and they get very good. And they are held accountable to solving those problems, whatever that problem is. That's a fundamentally different role in everything. Fundamentally, what it goes to is what is the purpose of the product team? If it's a feature team in roadmaps in those organizations that are addicted to roadmaps, I mean, I'm being very harsh here, but it's just, I'm being honest. They are there, those feature teams are there to serve the business. In fact, you'll literally hear that phrase a lot. But in a product company, they're not there to serve the business. They're actually there to serve customers in ways that work for the business, which is a completely different relationship. These feature teams with their roadmaps are subservient to the business. But in a real product company, they are actually collaborating with the business. They're partners with the business. But the real focus is on real customers. So, I'm describing the difference between an Amazon team or a Bank of America team kind of thing. It's most companies versus best companies. But these are big differences. There are more differences than that, but really they stem from this idea of what is the technology even for, and what are these teams here for? So obviously we're opening up a big can of worms, but That is no. The question was, do I advocate roadmaps and old style release planning? Not for 30 years, no.
Yeah, no, that's great, Marty. There's quite a number of questions and upvotes for this one in YouTube. So Dave Walker is asking whether or not you have a take on Shape Up as a product methodology.
Shape Up from the guys at
Basecamp.
Basecamp, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? I haven't read the book, and I, it's funny. I love those guys. I love their products, but I also think they are not representative of the vast majority of companies. They are founded by designers. In my dream companies, most companies are founded by designers. They're pretty much all designers. It's just, and they also have this really nice aspect, which is building products for themselves. Most of us are not doing that. And most of us are also not companies of designers. So I have found that most of their advice, I have a hard time recommending. As much as I admire them, I have a hard time recommending their advice to others. I don't find it really translates. So I haven't read the book. It's not something that many people talk about either. So I'm not sure how many people have actually read the book. But it's on my list. It's just not near the top is the problem.
Yeah. Fair enough. On the topic of design, one of the most recent questions that just came through. So some engineering teams believe cutting corners in UX to get out the door as soon as possible is how to create an MVP. How do I get engineering to understand the concept of an MVP?
Well, I mean, it sounds like it's the whole product team needs to understand the concept of it, probably starting with the product manager needs to understand what an MVP really is. So we can test these things. Remember, the point of an MVP is to test these risks: value, usability, feasibility, viability. And if we can get a successful result without a big investment in the design, then that'd be great. Some products are that way, but most of the time, the experience turns out to be pretty essential to the product. And so, again, I think what people are talking about, oh, we want to get this quote MVP out, and it's going to take 2 months if we just slap together a simple experience, but it's going to take 6 months if we do it right. And it's like, no, that's not at all how we build product. That is completely missing the point of lean startup and product discovery. So in general, though, what we're really talking about, what's the value of design? And it's pretty easy to quantify on consumer internet companies. I think it's a major advantage for B2B companies. And there's a trend in the B2B world called consumerization of the enterprise, which in short means your business software teams need first-class design as well. But it's also true that there's a bunch of companies out there that have horrible design and are still selling product. And I'm not going to advocate those companies. I don't think it's right for the users. I think these are terrible products. And I prefer to work with the companies that are disrupting them.
Yeah, thank you, Marty. The next question, I'm actually going to combine two questions here, one on YouTube and one on Pigeonhole. What is the right cadence to pivot or fail? And how do you know whether to actually pivot or throw the product out the door entirely?
Well, there's a third option, which is to keep trying, keep iterating. And in fact, the normal option is keep iterating. Now, the reason most teams they don't think of that is because they're doing that 4-month MVP we talked about. So if you spent 4 months building an MVP, and almost certainly I'll bet you it'll be a failure as an MVP, then what do? Do you pivot, which is what most of them do? Or maybe you're a startup, you're out of money, so it's game over. Or maybe you have enough money to do 2 or 3 more tries, something like that. But here's the reality. It typically takes for a startup between 50 and 100 iterations before you actually have a chance of getting product market fit. And that's, it could be more, but it's on the order of 50 to 100. If it takes you 3 or 4 months to do each iteration, you're never going to get there, which is what mostly happens. But if the company gets good at the product team, especially product manager, the designer, especially get really good at the different kinds of prototypes. A typical team in product discovery does between 15 and 30 iterations in a week. It's not hard to be able to try out many more ideas. So the bottom line is, the normal answer to that is iterate. We will iterate. If it's a real problem, we will iterate until we get something good. At a certain point, though, you do have to decide, are you really wasting time here? And maybe you should be revisiting your approach, which is one. That's called the discovery pivot. Sometimes you need to revisit your whole business idea. That's called a vision pivot. And sometimes, it's just there's bigger problems to solve. We'll put that one on the back burner for a while, and we'll work on something else. So, and that's honestly judgment. Those three are judgment, how long you spend. For the companies I coach or advise, a lot of times that's what they're asking. They're saying, look, we've worked on this problem for 3 weeks now. We have done 30 iterations. We've tried lots of things. We're still not there. And they'll ask, do you think we should just give up on this, or do you think we should keep trying? And there's no stock answer. I'll typically talk to them about, what have they tried? Where are they making progress? Are they getting closer? Or they feel like they're not? And then we'll get into it a little further. We'll talk about, well, where are the failures? Is it a value question? Is it a feasibility issue? What's going on? And we'll talk about it. But ultimately, it's a judgment call. And sometimes I'll say, this is so important, you have to keep going. And because if you can't solve this, if you can't get to, for example, product market fit, that it's game over anyway. So, and other times it's like, look, it's not a big deal. You've probably spent enough time on this already. Let's just put it on the back burner for a while, and there's plenty of other things to do.
Yeah, thanks for that, Marty. I'm going to ask a few questions related to the customer now. Who do you believe is the ultimate custodian of the customer? Is it the product team or the customer team?
I'm sorry, you were asking who's the ultimate customer?
No, who is the ultimate custodian of the customer? Is it the product team or is it the customer team?
What's a customer team? You mean customer service?
Yeah, customer service, customer success, customer support.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, it's sort of a false choice. All of us are there to really, one way or another, directly or indirectly serve the customers. The customer service teams, customer success teams can't actually create new solutions for customers. So as a product team, we're in a unique position to actually provide the products that our customers will either buy or not. And everybody else, people are there to market it, people are there to sell it, people are there to service it. There's all kinds of, people behind a company, but ultimately the product team is there to provide those solutions. I would not frame it as custodian. That just sounds all wrong to me. But I would say that the product team needs to know the users and customers better than anyone else, because they have to create those solutions. And there's very few non-negotiables in the tech world, but one of them is the product team needs direct access to users and customers. And so, and normally that's totally understood. It's only an exception case where some CEO or head of sales will say, you can't talk to customers, only the salespeople can talk to customers. And I tell those CEOs that they're basically toast as a company unless they get educated fast.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just on your point about getting direct access to a customer, Do you have any tips or advice on how to do this effectively, especially for much larger organizations where there tend to be a lot of different layers or a lot of different teams that get in the way?
Well, it's normally not that hard. The product teams get direct access to customers. The only question is, how do they meet them? And of course, there's a lot of different ways to do that. If it's a B2B customer, it's usually an introduction from a salesperson. They'll connect them with a customer. For example, the product manager will sit down with the head of sales and say, do you have any customers that you think have this problem today? And they'll probably say, yeah, I talked to my salespeople, comes back, here's 30 customers that have this problem. And then they'll go talk to them. The product manager and the product team will go talk to them. If it's a consumer internet company, there aren't really salespeople for that. But it's if we have customers that have been coming to our site, we can put things right on our landing pages that can find these people. We can do Google AdWords, SEM-based searches so that people that are looking for this solution come to us that way. There's dozens of techniques we have to get our users or customers. Those are just a few of them, but I've never had a hard time actually finding prospective customers. What's much harder is to please them.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair point. The next question actually revolves around, again, larger companies and how product leaders can effectively get across every single aspect of their products. And do you have any advice on how detailed they should really understand their products?
So I want to understand that question a little bit more. You're saying, well, try that again.
Yeah, I might rephrase it. So if I understand this question correctly, there's an assumption that larger companies have very rich product portfolios. And as a head of product or a CPO, do you have any advice on how that product leader can get across every single aspect of their product?
What get across what for what?
So my assumption is the level of details around what the product does, how it looks and feels, what the overall user experience is like, whether or not it does what it says on the tin.
Well, I'm still trying to understand why a head of product would be describing all the products to who. They're not going. So that I'm guessing that whoever asked that question probably had something else in mind. Yeah, or I'm not understanding the point of the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's fine. We might take another lap around that later on. Okay. What do you think are the most common mistakes when creating products?
Oh, that's a hard question. There's so many common mistakes. Yeah, what would be the most common mistakes? Well, if I had to pick one, it would probably be the team not focused on the biggest risk, which is value. So many product teams, especially if they're a feature team, the only thing they focus on is usability and feasibility. That's it. They don't focus on value and viability, which is where most products fall down, is those two. So now, largely, if you're a feature team, you don't even think it's your job to worry about that. It's the stakeholders do that. But in a real product team, it's absolutely the product team's job. So, I would say that's probably the biggest sort of class of mistakes, not understanding. Another big one is what, we were talking about before, teams that don't understand the techniques that you need to use in order to come up with product. They're just basically throwing things on the backlog, asking the engineers to build them, and then they see what sticks. And it's not impossible to do that, but it's incredibly slow and incredibly wasteful.
Mm-hmm. And there's a question actually on YouTube. So somebody's asked, how do you say no to stakeholder requests on resolving bugs in an early stage startup with customers in single digits?
Well, there's a lot of things in that question, that's for sure. What was the part about bugs, though? I missed that. About the
it's about, I think ultimately it's about saying no to the stakeholder in an early stage startup. So no doubt, you know, if it's one of your early customers, I'm sure they've got 50 ideas to share. How do you ultimately say no to some or all of their ideas?
All right. Well, so remember I said before in a old feature team company, the purpose of the team is to serve the business. That's exactly what you just described, that you described a team that's there to serve a stakeholder versus in a product company, the team is actually there to serve customers. Stakeholders are our partners for that, like the head of marketing or the head of legal or the head of sales. They are key partners, but that's not where the product team goes to figure out what to do. You don't go to the stakeholders and say, tell us what you want us to build. Don't get me wrong, this is a classic anti-pattern that's done by terrible product companies. I see it all the time. But that is not what good companies do. So the first thing you really want to do is, redefine how this company is going to work. If you want, I would argue, if they want to succeed. And the best answer for dealing with anybody in a company or even prospective customers that want special features, the best answer is to be able to point to happy, live, referenceable customers. If you've got a set of reference customers that you can point to that are already running your product happily and have paid for it for real and are willing to tell the rest of the world how much they love it, that is the best way possible to say no. You're not really saying no. You're saying, look, this works this way. Do this. And of course, you never actually have to say no. You can collect all these ideas. There's nothing wrong with that. But you do need to focus, and that's where product strategy comes in. We talked about that earlier. But product strategy is predicated on focus, which is a small number of things you're concentrating on solving, the things that really matter.
Sure. The next question is actually related to product and marketing and how these two functions can work really effectively together in successful product companies. Do you have any insights to share there?
Well, there's product, there's marketing, and then there's product marketing. Product marketing is usually the bridge between product and marketing. I didn't name any of these things. That's just, they've been that way forever. And product marketing is a fabulous area. It's had as much innovation as the product role has had. That's not the role I talk about that much. I have a partner, Martina Luchenko, is sort of the industry's major thought leader on product marketing. She writes about it. She's actually writing a book about it right now. There's not that much out there about good product marketing. You have to realize that a typical company, let's say a typical, small to medium-sized company might have 100 engineers, they might have 15 product managers, and they might have one product marketing person. So there's just not that many of them out there. So that's probably why there's not very good resources. But the truth is there's been great progress in product marketing. That world, somebody was asking earlier in a question about the old release planning, which is kind of amusing to me because it's been years since I've dealt with a company doing old style release plans. It's everybody I work with does continuous delivery. And we have great techniques for that, but it's a very different marketing world, product marketing world for that. And I think it's a way better world. Customers in the old world where they had to, every quarter, every year, they would get a new release and install it and re-verify it and train their people. All that ridiculousness is, there's no excuse for that today.
Yeah, thanks for those tips, Marty. The next question still focused on other functions. So this question comes from Rose Kurtz. how do we get externally facing teams such as sales, marketing, and support to understand, appreciate, and get excited about product improvements? And I'm going to assume that this is specifically around techniques and processes that a product manager can undertake to get those functions excited about product improvements.
I bet it's not. I bet they're talking about, no, we've done a update to our product, and the truth is, most of the sales and marketing could care less. They're not excited about it, and so the product team is excited about it, but unless you can get the field excited about it, the customers don't find out about it. That's almost certainly what the question is, because frankly, the rest of the organization shouldn't and doesn't care about how we work. That's sausage making. But they want them to care about the things that we're actually doing. And the answer to that is reference customers. In other words, we need to be able to, they don't care that we launch a feature. What does that even mean? That's just a feature. What they want to know is point to us as some customers that can do something now that they couldn't do before, and they are way happier because of it. That's what they want to see. And it's the job of product to come up with those customers, to generate those customers. It's actually the job of product marketing to tell the stories of those customers. Those are sales tools, but product team's job is to create those happy customers.
That's a great answer, Marty. The next question is a little more structural now, actually looking at a cross-functional product team. Is there a golden ratio of product managers, designers, and engineers?
There's not a golden ratio, but there are some bounds. And I'll tell you why in a second. But the normal product team is a product manager, a product designer, and a minimum of 2 and a maximum of about 10 to 12 engineers. So that's a pretty big range, 2 to 12. And 12 would be a very large team. Even 10 would be a very large team. Of course, the reason 2 is usually the minimum is, if it's just 1 and that person is, has a cold or something, then everything stops. So it's normally a minimum of 2 engineers. And of course, we don't need a designer necessarily if it's a platform team. It's just APIs. But assuming it's customer facing or customer enabled, it's got a user experience. We call them experience teams versus platform teams. Then it would have a product manager and a designer. And those are dedicated full-time, and between 2 and 10 or 10 to 12 engineers. Now, the reason for that range is because it takes a certain amount of discovery work to generate enough good work on a backlog for a set of engineers between 2 and 10. Normally, if it's very heavy user experience, like if we're doing a native mobile app for your phone, that would be more like 2 or 3 engineers. If you're working on something like lower level, say, data services, and it may be in a platform team, it would be probably closer to 8 to 10 or so engineers. But those are just empirical ratios based on the kind of software. But if you have too many engineers, then there's no way the product manager and designer are going to be able to keep up. And if you have too few engineers, then you end up, the product and design end up generating stuff that doesn't actually get built.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff that resonates well with me as well, Marty. Thanks for that. Latest question that came in via YouTube. Any insights into how product teams can better use data?
Well, how product teams can use data. So, well, I would argue that really there's 2 core sources of our information: the customers, which is mostly qualitative, and the data, which of course is quantitative. And every product team is using that every day. The question was about the data side, so we can talk there. Normally, the product manager of a modern product team starts their day with somewhere between a half an hour and an hour in the data tools. There's usually, not always, but usually 3 tools that they're using. One of those tools is showing us basically the user analytics, what they're actually clicking on and not clicking on. And then the second is sales analytics, things like in salesforce.com. How are trials converting into purchases? What are people buying in a configuration, whatever it is. And then the third is really how the data is changing over time. That's in the data warehouse. So the product manager is expected to be on top of those three sources of data. And I mean, good product teams are running they're running live data tests every week. So the company, the whole team rather, is looking at the product manager to understand where we're at, what's working and what's not.
Yeah, next question is actually around research. So how do you find the right balance for research, and how much is too much?
Well, I assume we're talking user research. Is that, you think so?
That would be my assumption.
Okay, well, user research is the other side of this question. We had just talked about the quantitative side, the data. The other side is the qualitative side. And there's really two kinds of user research, and they're both awesome, but they sort of play a different role for us. In the user research world, they call one of them evaluative, which is basically we've got a product idea. It's usually in a prototype. We need to see if it works or not. User research can help us answer that question quite quickly. And then the other kind is generative, which is, are there ideas that we're not pursuing that we should be? Now, in daily product discovery work, it's mostly evaluative. It's mostly because we already have been assigned a problem that we need to solve. So we already know what problem we need to work on. It might be churn, like I said before, it might be onboarding, or it might be revenue, it could be anything. But we already have a problem. And so what we're trying to quickly figure out is if we've solved it or not, or what we need to do to solve it. However, there's also a major, there's a good role for ideas and insights based on our customers. And so even when you're just testing product ideas, good product teams will often stumble across real insights about our users and customers. And those insights, even if you're not going to use it for what you're working on right now, they might actually be the key to your product strategy, the sort of missing link to your product strategy, or they might be the big thing that gets pursued next quarter. So we love research, user research. It's normally done as part of product discovery. It's a huge topic that we could talk more about, but one of the things you don't want to do is you want to make sure that it's the product team that's doing this learning. You don't want a separate user research team going off and doing this learning. And the reason for that is because the teams, if they're not there, they won't learn enough of what the user researcher is learning. That's wasted learning in most cases. So I tell the user researchers their job is way too important to do themselves, because then it will largely be ignored, which most of them have seen that their whole career. They get all these insights and nobody does anything with them. So I tell them what they're doing wrong there is the purpose of them is really to make sure the insights get into the heads of the product managers and the designers on those teams. So you don't want to go. The other thing you don't want to do is go off and do like 3 months of research. The leaders of the organization, in most organizations, will start to freak out way before that ever gets that far. They need to see more active progress. So I've been a big advocate of the user research happening all the time, a little bit, rather than big bursts every year or something.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. No doubt that's a big topic. And I might actually go to the first question that was asked when we started this AMA. So Julian Karen asks, what would be some good reference materials, whether it's books or influencers, to help with product discovery?
Well, that's why I wrote the book, is because I didn't know of any. There are lots of articles. One of my favorite authors is Teresa Torres. Some of you may know her. She writes a blog called ProductTalk.org. She writes all about discovery techniques. I find her stuff very good. Jeff Patton, some of you know him. He actually did write a book after Inspired. It's called Story Mapping, but it's really about discovery. It's a little more hands-on agile, but it's about discovery techniques. And that's another good book for sure. But there's quite a bit out there online. It's and certainly all the lean startup stuff is a subset of discovery, so that would be included too.
Thanks, Marty. The most recent question that just came in on YouTube is actually quite an interesting one, and I think in a lot of ways goes against your recommendations on how to build effective product. But I do see this in a lot of organizations. So Patrick Gordon asks, we're struggling with a sales arm that is trying to dictate features to get deals done in B2B. What steps can we take right now to break that cycle and get ahead of the curve?
Well, that's actually the same question that came up earlier when the stakeholders were saying it. But it's, and, most people complain about, they call that sales-driven product. And I try to tell teams, because they complain about that, but I tell them, look, that's a consequence of the product organization not doing their job. Because their job is to create reference customers for the sales organization. Otherwise, I guarantee you that's exactly what will happen. So there is a technique. It's talked about in the book Inspired, but it's also, there's whole books on this technique. One of them is called, what is it called? Lean Customer Development. And the technique is called the Customer Discovery Program. And it's all about, in the B2B context, especially about how do you get those reference customers. But that's probably the oldest song in product. And in fact, that's why people hated doing product years ago, because that's how it all worked. Sales told marketing what to do, and marketing told, well, there wasn't really product. It told engineers what to do. That's how it worked. That, of course, is not how we do good products.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly believe in that as well. There's a question that was posted on Pigeonhole, and that is, success is short-lived in product management side. We are faced with significant constraints and challenges, and it's always the fault of the product owner or the product manager. Any thoughts around that?
Well, so I do. First, I want to be clear. Product owner, that term might have been used loosely or might have been intentionally, because the product owner is just a small subset of a product manager's responsibilities. But assuming we're talking a real product team, success is short-lived. I mean, if you do a good job with product, you never have, there is never a totally defensible position. Other people will come, but when you create a good product, it's not so easy. And if you take care of your customers, they're not going to switch on you. If you don't take care of customers, then they do for sure. So yeah, I try to keep teams focused on that. But there was another part to that question. I was trying to remember what it was. Can you say that question one more time?
Yeah, success is short-lived in product management side. We are faced with significant constraints and challenges, and it's always the fault of the PO or the PM.
Right. Yes, sorry. Well, it was the fault part. I was trying to say that it's sort of an old saying, but it's a truism that in product, if you have a success, it's because everybody in the team did what they needed to do. But if you have a failure, it's the product manager. And I tell people that kind of comes with the territory. Now, if you're a feature team, that's not really true. It's because the product manager, like I said, is really a project manager. But if you're a true empowered product team, then that's what the product manager is being asked to step up to. And that's why on a true empowered product team, you've probably heard the phrase, the product manager, a good product manager is the CEO of her product. And the reason that's said is because in a real product team, The product manager is responsible to make sure that product is valuable and viable, which in a startup, that's exactly what the founder is responsible for. So the founder might have a designer responsible for usable and engineers responsible for feasible, but that founder is responsible for valuable and viable, just like on a product team. So yeah, that's very high level of responsibility. And it's the single biggest reason why a product job is not for everybody. A lot of people don't want that responsibility.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's definitely a tough gig. One of the more recent questions to come through, should the product team be focusing on features that fulfill the needs of a wider audience? So in other words, many personas, or focus on a single persona?
Well, so there's two dimensions to that. One is, do you try to please a lot of personas or segments with one feature? And the other is, how many people in a given persona or segment should be pleased by something you build? And it's the latter one that's actually more relevant. Trying to build a feature that all your different kinds of customers are going to love is very difficult and usually a recipe for failure. It's usually much better to focus on a particular segment. It could be a persona, it could be a vertical market, it could be a geography at once, and get it to the point where they are happy and successful. And the other thing I would mention is, don't think in terms of features. It's rarely features. In fact, I'm much more interested today in removing features than adding features, because, I mean, we have so much data today to show that features very often don't help. They're just a big no-op. Sometimes they even hurt, especially on mobile apps, because there's so little real estate. But it's not about adding features. It's about solving problems.
Great, thanks for that, Marty. There's a question that just came in. I'll play it back as it's written, but I might actually rephrase it based on what I think they're asking. So, why do you need to do product discovery for fairly standard platforms such as ads, fintech, teleconsultation, etc., for which you know the use cases based on your past experience building the same? So, I think the question is basically, for well-known established verticals out there where the problems are well understood, where the solutions are well understood, do you need to go through the same level of product discovery?
Well, let's talk about that. So first of all, every situation is different. You do not, it's a risk profile. You need to spend your time in discovery in areas that really need it, where the risks are big. If you don't think something is risky, and if your designer agrees with you and your tech lead agrees with you, then you're just going to put it on the backlog and be done with it. So, and a lot of things are like that. You need to save the time in discovery for the truly risky things. All right, that said, what a lot of companies mess up in is, look, the reason doing tech product is so hard is because you have to get your solution to the point where yours is so much better than the competition that people will actually switch. And Ben Horowitz likes to argue that in order to get people to switch, it has to be perceived as on the order of 10 times better. That's a really high bar. And if you are going to try to get a product significantly better than your competitors, then it's not going to happen by copying the features of your competitors. It's only going to happen if you figure out a solution to that is significantly better, and that is product discovery. So I will often be told, somebody says, oh, we're doing another ad tech platform, and we already know what to build because we have to do these things because our salespeople say so. I'm like, then what, you're just going to add up, it's called the feature parity strategy, and you're just going to copy those features. But why would anybody switch to you? Are you going to undercut them a little bit on price? It's not going to work. You have to be perceived as significantly better. Normally, that means solving it in a much better way. I mean, and we have so many examples of that. I mean, you don't have to look further than Google search. I was around when Google search first came out, and if you remember the predecessors, there were lots of search engines. They were just all were terrible. Or when the iPhone came out, there were lots of phones. They were just all terrible. Or when the iPod came out, there were lots of MP3 players. They were just all terrible. Or when Slack came out, it's not like there weren't ways to email and message and stuff into your team. It was just they weren't nearly as good as Slack was, or Zoom with video conferencing. The point is, none of those companies came up with their solutions by copying another company. They came up by discovering a better way to solve the problem, usually by enabling technology.
Thanks, Marty. I'm going to replay a comment that Rose Kurtz posted on YouTube, and it's the head of product should definitely understand how their products function and the user experience. And I think it kind of ties back to that previous question that we didn't quite understand or necessarily answer. If I understand it correctly, this probably pertains to much bigger organizations. So if you look at Facebook or Google, you might have a head of product there, and they're managing 100 product teams, under their particular function. How does that head of product really get into the detail of their products and understand it end to end?
Well, I'm really just wondering, missing the premise of that. Normally they don't, and they shouldn't. They don't need to. Now, they probably came up through the organization, so there's probably quite a bit that they know, but what kind of horrible leader would they be if they're trying to micromanage down to all these teams? I mean, these organizations we're talking about have hundreds of product teams. So that's a really, if I'm understanding correctly, a pretty nonsensical premise. They absolutely have to have a holistic view of the product, though, which is at a much higher level. And what they need to be focused on is the vision, the product strategy, the objectives for the company dashboard, the health KPIs for it. They have a huge job, not to mention staffing, coaching, but it's not knowing and controlling or whatever, knowing the details of every one of the teams. That's just would be a terrible use of their position and their time. It's not that they couldn't learn, and they probably do know the details of several teams, but that's just like, where does that come from? I feel like we're missing something major behind that question.
Sure. No, thanks, Marty. The next question revolves around investment opportunities. So how do you convince an executive team to invest in a product opportunity when the ROI is not clear?
Well, it's normally the other way around. The vision is something that the leaders have come up with. So whether we're going to invest or not has already been made. So the only question is, how are we going to do it? So it's not about, oh, I've got this, I want to go do this. I want to make this money or do this. Here's the ROI. It's like, this is the vision. And our team has been asked to solve this part of that vision. So you see what I mean? It's really driven the other direction normally. It's not like companies say, oh, come up with whatever you think will generate the best ROI. That's not usually how it works.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. We've been going for a little over an hour now, and I'm conscious it's getting pretty late there. So I might actually just ask one more question and then look to wrap it up, and that way you can get to bed a little earlier than what you might go to bed if we keep this going for much longer. So lucky last question. Globally, what is product management's biggest problem right now?
I would say the biggest problem is this sort of prevalence of feature teams, that most of the organizations out there are not actually using the brains, the minds, the talents of the people that they are in their organization. They are just there as mercenaries, just there to crank out features, and they aren't being allowed to really put their minds to use and their skills and training to use to solve hard problems. So to me, there's a tremendous amount of wasted talent out there, or you could say untapped potential out there. And I see that as the fundamental difference between how the great companies work and how most companies work. And I would love to see that change.
Great answer, Marty. Thanks so much. Look, I wanted to first thank you, Marty. Obviously, it's quite late there, and we really appreciate the fact that you've managed to dial in all the way from San Francisco and join the Perth community. Big thank you to the 100+ members that joined this particular live stream. Hopefully you all got some great value out of it, and we'll find the opportunity to get Marty out here in person once this COVID-19 crisis is over.
Okay, great.
Great, thanks everyone. We'll leave it there, and we'll look to post some surveys out after this event and try and get some feedback from all of you. I really enjoyed this session, so again, thank you, Marty, and we hope to connect with you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.